One of the slightly eye-catching stories we had from Formula One in the Azerbaijan Grand Prix weekend was when we learned ahead of the race that Kimi Raikkonen had been excluded from qualifying and was condemned to start from the pit lane, as it turned out. So we're going to try and uncover exactly why Raikkonen's Alfa Romeo front wing was illegal, and who better to help us explain that than our technical expert, Jake Boxall-Legge. JBL, we've got an Alfa Romeo front wing here, so let's get straight into it. Why exactly was the car illegal, and what are the facts that we know in terms of what went wrong and the sort of tests that Alfa would have had to go through, and why it didn't get picked up, strangely, until Sunday?
Yeah, so they were tested it on Sunday morning. It's like a random test. What they do is they have a flex test for the front wing. So anything forward of the front wing, front tyres, that gets a 1,000 Newton test around this point and this point here, and it's like a template that fits over the wing. There's like a ram that applies that force and essentially pushes it down. And then that is your flex test. It's 15 millimeters of flex. If it's over that, then it fails and they've got to use a different one and test it. And that's exactly what happened to Raikkonen's front wing. So that was this point here had failed. It had broken in the Chinese Grand Prix, which Alfa knew, but decided to leave it on. They thought they would be okay, but it failed by about 0.5 of a millimetre.
Ooh.
And yeah, it's tiny, tiny margins. And yeah, they had to go away and fix something and put it back into place essentially. So yeah, and interrupted a Sunday morning for them. That put Raikkonen at the back, or well, from the pit lane rather. So not really something that they would have wanted at all.
No, it's a slightly curious story in a way. I mean, we can obviously understand that a car fails a test by a tiny margin, and those are the kind of margins we're often talking about of legality in F1. It's rarely a big amount because the teams are more savvy than that and they wouldn't take that sort of risk. But what was curious here was the explanation that we got from the team that was kind of along the lines of, oh yeah, we knew about that because we damaged it in China. And it's fair enough if you're a team that damages a wing and doesn't have time to produce a new one, but slightly odd that they went into the weekend seemingly knowing that they might fail this test.
Well, as I say, it's completely random, and it's just so happens that they randomly chose the wing that was going to fail. So presumably, well, they knew about it and presumably somebody grassed them up about it. We don't know, but it is a very strange one because they said that they couldn't fix it before China, and then suddenly they failed this wing test, and then suddenly they're able to fix it. So it's a bit curious. They had to change the wing stays, which are sort of holding the flap adjuster to that particular section of the wing, just reinforcing it. So that's what would have caused that small amount of deflection. After that, it was fine and it was good to go. But it seems that Alfa almost thought that they were able to get away with it. They weren't, and again, presumably somebody had heard about it and had sort of grasped them up a little bit. But yeah, it's a really strange situation, isn't it?
Yeah, it's bizarre, and in some ways I struggle, aside from the fact they couldn't make a new one, I struggle to have much sympathy really, because if they knew about it, why not perhaps flag it up? There's been talk that in the past, when Charlie Whiting was running this side of things for the FIA, if you did go to him and say, look, we've got this issue with damage, it might fail this test, can we just get through this weekend? He might say, okay, yeah, there's no performance advantage there, which was the claim from Alfa in this case, and he would have allowed it. But the other reason I don't have any sympathy is what you mentioned just then, the fact that they said, we can't fix it, got thrown out, and suddenly came up with a fix. So I can't get my head around what's going on there.
Well, I think some of it is partially because they didn't flag it up, and because presumably they knew internally that it wasn't sort of quite on the bounds of legality as such. The FIA might have taken exception to that, and that's why they've gone hardline with it and thrown Raikkonen's qualifying result out. And they're taking a very much a zero tolerance policy. We saw this with Pierre Gasly and his fuel flow during qualifying as well, even though he was never going to actually qualify in a good position. He thought, okay, let's go all or nothing on this lap. Went over the 100 kilograms per hour fuel flow limit. Whether that was just a tiny spike or anything like that, that's still over, so that's grounds to be thrown out. But as I say, this is a hardline policy. Back in the past, before he sadly passed away, Charlie Whiting was sort of like the guy that would take all of those concerns and people would go to him. Who do they go to now? The FIA is in a little bit of a state of flux at the moment, and not for any good reason at all. But they don't really know who the figurehead is, how they're going to react to that, whether they'll make them change it. As you said, Charlie Whiting might have gone, okay, it's a tiny amount, we'll let this slide for now. It's not going to have any performance advantage or anything like that. So it's a bit of a weird situation. It's sort of like a manifestation of lots of different things. Obviously, Alfa Romeo should have owned up to it, been a bit honest and said, okay, this is a bit broken, fixed it, and all of this would have been avoided. But, well, it's all coming out in the wash now, so it's quite an interesting situation.
Yeah, and it's potentially things like this and the Gasly situation that you mentioned are perhaps a warning shot for the teams that there is a new era at the FIA now through really unfortunate circumstances with the loss of Charlie Whiting. And it's very difficult when one man has been controlling all of that in the way that he did, and all the relationships he had to manage and the way he tried to keep everything under control. Nobody's going to be able to replicate that. We've talked about that at length when we talked about, you know, what a loss Charlie was just to F1. So perhaps now all the teams are going to have to be on alert, really, for the fact that these little details aren't going to slide anymore. So we could end up with you back in this sofa almost on a bi-weekly basis whenever we have a Grand Prix now, going, oh look, here's another tiny thing that another team has been caught out by. Could you see that developing over the next few races?
Well, certainly. I think it's with good reason as well, because the rules are there as rules. Someone once said to be rules are meant to be broken, but that's just not true. They're there to be adhered to. So it's the same for everybody. If you're outside the bounds of the rules, then it's illegal. There shouldn't really be any grey area. Sometimes there are, because, you know, interpretation is everything. But again, yeah, it's the same for everybody. In an ideal world, this is the sort of thing that, you know, you're outside the bounds of the rules, so you'll be thrown out. That's ideally what the rules are there to provide. So I know motorsport is, you know, all about trying to cheat and get away with as much as you can, but it's a good thing in some respects that they're taking a little bit more of a harder policy to it, because it just means that people aren't going to take the mickey.